Morning, everybody. Has that got it? Okay. Can everybody hear us? Is the sound okay? Okay, thank you. So good morning and welcome to Cartels as a space of not with a K, knowing. We're just a little bit after time. Just people are still entering, but we're going to begin. And just to let you know that those who are joining us via Zoom, you're projected on the large screen behind us for those who are present with us in person. My name is Caroline Hinu, and I'm the current chair of ICLO. Most years, towards the beginning of ICLO's program for the academic year, we hold a Cartel event similar in form to this one. For sure, we can say that it's to reignite or reinvigorate our desire in forming cartels, facilitating the creation of new cartels, linking those of us who want to work on a specific theme, for instance, towards the NLS Congress title next year. Each time a cartel is formed, offering a gentle reminder of the importance of registering the cartel with the school. But the other reason, the main reason, is to provide a space to speak of what a cartel is, its function and its link to the school. This is the part that's not so easy to capture with words, the essence of which, by its very definition, cannot be entirely caught by signifiers. Sorry, is there someone waiting to get in there? Sorry. Before introducing you to today's program and presenters, I would like to make use of a thread in the exhibit, merely as an aid or a guide to speak of cartels in relation to the school. This year, you could say that we have an added and very welcome impetus to these questions about the cartel. At the closing remarks of the NLS Congress earlier this year in July, held in Lausanne, the NLS president, Daniel Waugh, provided us with a focus by announcing the NLS orientation this year as schoolmaking, faire école, derived from the recent impasse, indeed crisis, that was encountered in the device of the pass in the ECF last year, along with the publication of Jacques-Alain Miller's book, How Analyses End, Paradoxes of the Pass, in English, at that particular moment. And so, to my little thread that I'm going to attempt to weave between the school, the pass, the cartel, and how they intertwine. But not before drawing your attention to the signifier paradox of Miller's book. The Cambridge Dictionary states the following for paradox: a situation or statement that seems impossible or is difficult to understand because it contains two opposite facts or characteristics. So we've encountered the signifiers: impossible, impasse, failure, crisis. We are already in a dialect of the unconscious, that which has more than one. Firstly, I think it's important to remind ourselves that Lacan founded the school and the cartel device at the same time in 1964. It would not be for another 3 years that he would found the device of the pass. To catch hold of my invisible thread, I'll begin by premising that both the training of analysts and the transmission of psychoanalytic knowledge, these two devices are the pillars, the organ, the support of the school, that upon which the school rests. We use different reference signifiers, which I prefer long, as it implies breath, the body, life, vitality, and therefore desire, ultimately linking to the desire of the analyst and the pass. Founding the school almost 60 years ago, Lacan invented a completely different type of psychoanalytic community than that which already existed. Meticulously and precisely applying his teaching, he created his school as a circular community without hierarchy, without master discourse. Miller would later name the school as subject, determined by its members' signifiers, of which it is the effect. To carry this thread to the Cartel device, we can see that its structure is premised on the following: a transference on work. Therefore, its social link between members is not grounded on imaginary identification. To further guard against the imaginary lure, permutation or rotation of members is ensured by the Cartel's defined duration in advance. Its ideal is not that of another, but of a cause, and its structure is one without hierarchy. Here, we bring in the function of +1, essential to the dimension of the group. The +1 ensures that each member has her own singular trait to follow in the Cartel, which in turn is registered with the school. Many of us can no doubt speak to having started working in a Cartel with one trait and having ended with a completely different one. In other words, each one's master signifier turns out not to be that one. And we continue with this newly acquired knowledge until we find the next one, each time getting a little closer to desire. This slippery thing that we know as desire, which is never quite neither what we think nor where we think it is. Once we speak of desire, we cannot but think of the whole and the effect required once more, each time from which to elaborate, from which to circumscribe. It is this subjective effect, this knowledge that we require that, this is a quote, is verified in act, the link between transmission and a certain analytical truth. This is the reason to register the Cartel with the school, for in its nomination as Cartel, the whole is installed at its heart. It's a quote from a paper by Philip Lacanian, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, entitled The Cartel of Lacan School, and it's on ICLO's website. It's an extremely precise and concise article. So my thread has brought me back to the school, and specifically to a phrase of Miller's, which is its fundamental principle. He tells us that the school as a collective formation founds itself on subjective loneliness. In other words, that each one is alone with their own jouissance, with their own other, that is the signifier. This is the sum of subjective loneliness, and it's the meaning of our formula of one by one. This is the paradox of the school and its wager. Jacques-Alain Miller goes on to paraphrase the famous novel by Carson McCullers by saying, the school is a lonely crowd. My colleagues will very shortly elaborate on all these various points and more besides. For my part, I'd like to finish with two anecdotes, which will bring me back to desire. The first one goes back many, many years ago to a Cartel, where we all seem to have difficulty getting our heads around the concept of desire, getting caught in its traps and how to think the fantasy. The +1 suggested we might care to read a novel, a very well-known one by Carson McCullers, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Taking what I considered to be a well-earned break from reading Lacan, I settled down to enjoy the narrative of the novel. I can still recall the exact point in the novel that I experienced as a shock. To say that I had not seen the turn of events as they had transpired is somewhat of an understatement. When the cartel reconvened to discuss the novel and what each one had discovered for themselves within its pages, I was struck once again with the realization that no one else in the cartel had even been surprised by the turn of events which had impacted me so. They had foreseen it. It was obvious to them. That was the moment that I learned that each one reads a novel, watches a movie, sees the world through the prism of fantasy. What an ingenious and inspired way to make emerge subjective effects in that cartel. The second anecdote, much shorter, relates to an abrupt cartel ending, as sometimes happens, and the ensuing interpretation of the +1. These were the words. The cartel is, after all, only held together by a desire on the part of each one to work together with some others for a limited time on a specific project. I have always subscribed to the Borromean principle of the cartel. If one goes free, then all the others are set free too. I thought it was very beautiful. Without delaying any longer, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, which are not all on the screen at this moment in time, and also to announce the slight change to the program that we had announced, but it's only in the order of speakers. Our speakers today are all members of ICLO. First, Ross McCarthy, whom you can see on the screen beside me, is ICLO Cartel Delegate and will speak to a cartel encounter, followed by Linda Clarke, NLS Cartel Commission, who will speak cartel not with a K, without the school. At that point, we may have a pause for your comments, suggestions, remarks, before we continue with Rick Loza, speaking to some introductory notes on cartel experience, and ending with Eva Sophia Reinhofer, our ICLO Cartel Delegate, speaking to One Lung. Okay, Ross, it's over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Caroline. And thank you to the Bureau as well for making this day possible. Okay, so a cartel encounter. So some introductory comments, first of all. Prior to joining ICLO-NLS cartels a couple of years ago, I had for the previous 10 years been a member of a Freud Lacanian reading group whose compass was orientated by Charles Melmont, friend and colleague of Lacan and founder of Ali in 1982. The reading group experience generated an important transmission of knowledge and of desire. Along the reading group route, I also became interested in the writings of Miller, Laurent, Marie-Hélène Bruce, to name but a few. Their productions provoked somewhat different subjective holds and desire. There are discernible differences in the experience of cartels and reading group. What of those divergences are connected to ICLO-NLS's relationship to the school, to the structure of reading groups and those of cartels, to the different orientations and elaborations of Melmont and Miller, and the singularity and inscription of one's own subjectivity at different points in time? For today, I extract some subjective effects of elements of the cartel's operative structure. The subject effect that is produced, says Miller, and which disturbs its function, is articulated with the other, the big other. It is this we call the collective of the social. This extract from Miller's The Turing Theory of the Subject of the School provoked a question. From the experience of working in a cartel, what is the connection between the subject-effect, which is articulated with the other, the oneness of solitude, which is revealed by the collective of the social, and the inscription of one's trait within both the cartel and the school? This paper follows some of those threads. So some structural elements. Because the experiences were so diverse, in a first attempt to make sense of the effect of the cartel's structure, I reread Lacan's founding act and extract from that some elements that were operative in the encounter. The act, he says, is not a production of meaning or production of knowledge, but an act that produces work. While production of work is essential, a production that one makes one's own of it, what it accentuated was that its primary function was not about the acquisition of knowledge. That is more the prerogative of study groups, seminars, and reading groups. This is knowledge gained from perception, from connaissance. It is subjective knowledge which is at work in the cartel, and at its center, a whole, a real dimension. Lacan wrote the founding act in the week between the penultimate and final sessions on transference at the end of Seminar 11, the 4 fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis. When he established his school in 1964, Lacan set out a framework for the work of the Freudian school to be accomplished. For the execution of the work, he says, we shall adopt the principle of an elaboration supported in a small group. He was, in the adjunct to the act, to name the small group a cartel. The group size was not to be less than 3, with a +1, who, I quote, is charged with the selection, with the discussion, and with the outcome to be reserved for the work of each. So the +1 is not an additional one, that is, 3 + 1. Rather, the function offers a different dimension. This flat, non-hierarchical invention, where each member is equal in relation to a work to be accomplished, Lacan deemed as one of the lungs of the school, principal place of provoked, sustained elaboration. It has been and is an animated rendezvous with elaborations that are fragments, incomplete answers, threads half woven. The function of the +1 was constantly reworked by Lacan. On March 11, 1980, at the moment of the dissolution of the school, amongst other clarifications of the cartel, Lacan states, the +1 is charged with overseeing the internal effects of the enterprise and to provoke its elaborations. The function of the +1 is thereby underlined. But as early as 1964, the one of the +1 already inserts into the discourse of the cartel, the ad-la. There is something of the one, elaborated in Lacan's later seminars. We see the one echoed also in solitude, the trait, and the school one. I'll return to the trait in a moment. Chosen, okay. No. I'll quote from Caroline Leddock's paper. The +1, she says, is put in the position of being the leader of the group, but he's a poor leader, weakly invested. In this weakness, in this hollow, lives the transference to the school, providing vectors to the joint work. There is a proximity of the school to the cartel in the NLS that I hadn't previously experienced. While it is present in the double barreling of the name, ICLO-NLS, I began to question whether the significance of the +1 as a weakly invested leader was a structural element that allowed for the contiguity of the cartel and the school. In a surprising explication and double movement, surprising to me at least, having worked with the master discourse of a reading group, which is a clearly defined leader and where members are working on a common theme, Jacques-Alain Miller embeds the +1, the agent provocateur, in the discourse of the cartel, naming it as a hysterical discourse. Hysterical discourse is one of insatisfaction. I'll leave it in the French, actually. I think there's something of a difference between that and dissatisfaction. The agent provocateur assumes a subjective division so as to obtain the elaborations induced by the whole. Knowledge is obtained, says Miller, as a result only on the condition of placing the +1 in the position of the barred subject. The aim of the +1 is to insert the subjective effect, which is different from aiming at subjective division. The +1 is neither a master, the one who puts to work, or a subject supposed to know the analytical position. Furthermore, the +1 works on his cartel question. He is also a subject in want of knowledge. It is a distinctive element of and in the cartel. It is desire, not the master, which comes in place of making the subject work. In the discourse of the master, the divided subject is in the place of truth. Knowledge turns away from truth. A passion for knowledge is a defensive action against truth. The real, the impossible is kept at bay. The effects of the position of the +1 as barred subject, as opposed to that of master, was one axis of the whirlwind that I encountered. The master, according to Miller, can only put to work a knowledge that is already there, and he can only produce that which is outside the symbolic. Let us say the objet. It is this objet which makes the subject work. And where cartels cannot testify to what we have done, says Miller, that seems to me to be the sign that there was something of the master at the start, which has not been rid of. In 1975, at a journey of the École Freudienne de Paris, Lacan refined the size and structure of cartels. There were to be no more than 4 cartelisans. I quote, "Why the 4 from the onset is, I repeat, what remains to be well situated." And he continues, "The fact that it is small is altogether essential. It is essential for its functioning. If I said that it can't go beyond 6, it's for the best of reasons. It's for theoretical reasons that are very profound," end quote. What interests Lacan about the small group is it does not aim at the universal. It is in fact a struggle against blind universalism. And, says Laurent, these small groups, which through their work will have to struggle against the malaise of identification with the master. They will have to remedy this malaise of having to go through the signifiers. In the, end quote, in the struggle against this blind universalism, the not all of feminine circulates in the cartel. The feminine not all allows for singularity and possibilities. It is desire, the inscription, the production of work, the having to go through the signifier, which has and is a necessary response to the feminine not all. In the above mentioned 75 journey of the EFP, in the same paragraph where Lacan specifies the effect of the size of the group, he also identifies the size of the group on one's own analysis. The sentence reads, "Taking on a very large group involves in itself such limitations, this is what I think at least, that there's not much to be expected from it in terms of the real progress on the effects of analysis. This is what inspired me when I produced this founding act." A whirlwind. To speak of an encounter is to highlight the missed encounter. A whirlwind actually and accurately captures my experience. A whirlwind in the natural world refers to an atmospheric vortex of rapidly swirling air, which forms due to instabilities and turbulence. It has different axes, and I underline different wind speeds. In the natural world, where the real has prevailed, whirlwinds are invariably localized. The whirlwind of the experience of the cartel is framed within the not all, and at its center, a hole in knowledge. A quote from Rollier, "In the cartel, it's the hole in knowledge which vacuums, and thus arises desire, a hole around which occurs the formations of the unconscious." Lacan reminds us, he says, that the unconscious is aspirated by this hole. Lacan links desire to a hole, to the whirlwind. Above all, he says, when desire, it seems to me, is tied to the notion of a hole, and of a hole in which many things go swirling around, only to be swallowed up. But joining the notion of a whirlwind to a hole is obviously already making this hole multiple. What I mean is making it into at least a conjunction. To draw a whirlwind, recall my knot, the one in question, he's referring to the Borromean knot. You need at least 3 of them to make a whirlwind hold. If there were no hole, I don't really see what we analysts would be doing. And if this hole is not at least 3-fold, I do not see how it could support our technique. The latter essentially refers to something that is triple and suggests a triple hole, end quote. How we knot is singular. Additionally, the function of the +1 is not to knot the relationship between cartelisans, the relationship between cartelisans, nor between himself and individual cartel members. This happens more in master discourse, but to support the relationship that each one has to his work, to what he has to say. The cartel isn't a whole, it's a place to elaborate from a whole relying on the possibility given to each member to face the whole in knowledge. What emerges is a scattered knowledge, bits and pieces that are sometimes contradictory and never conclusive. A knowledge that is a little disappointing, says Leduc. In fact, but that produces no disenchantment because it palpitates with desire. It is a knowledge held in suspense. Something is additional is there to know. The one and the trait. In contemporary society, Miller says, the relation between the two sexes is going to become more and more impossible. So that, to put it this way, the one all alone will be the post-human standard. The one all alone, commanded by a surplus jouissance that is presented under its most generating aspect. End quote. The contemporary subject is invited to enjoy alone. It is the place of solitude, isolation, and segregation. Each one is alone, fastened to a master signifier, alone with one's own extimate jouissance. Solitude is the body enjoying itself. The chain of signifiers unshackled in solitude. Metaphor, like meaning, dissipate. There's no consistent other, but there's not just nothingness. There may not be a chain, but there is a swarm of signifiers. There is one. When Lacan speaks of Yad-La, there is something of the one. It is the one of existence, pure real of the signifier. One all alone without meaning. That is to say, without two. One all alone in the real dimension, a dimension that detaches itself from images and attaches itself to the speaking body. We are, in the first instance, speaking of the signifier one, the one of pure difference. A quote from Lacan, Seminar 19. This position of the signifier takes shape in an experience which is in reach of every one of you. The one turns out to be virtue of this fact, to be strictly constituted by the place of lack. The experience of participating in cartels is to be confronted with one's own solitude, one's singular difference populated with wholes. What to do with not knowing, with the bodily effects that are modes of jouissance. To silence oneself, silence one's own words, is of the order of disappearance. Subjective disappearance, according to Marielle and Bruce, makes room and is, and I quote, is key to this other non-localizable satisfaction, which he names as the void of feminine jouissance. The trait is of a different order. It inserts the subject by naming and identifying him by his work subject. It circumscribes something of feminine jouissance. Miller gave us the basic theme of the provoked elaboration in the cartel. An S1, a subjective master signifier, going towards an S2 knowledge. It is here we see the trait at work, a relationship to one's own master signifier and a production of fragments which inscribes the subject and their own work. Members work from their own insignia and not from their lack of being, says Miller. I grasped something about putting the symptom to work, how the insignia, the trait, works from a support that is already symptomatic. The trait, desire to work. The signifier trait is prominent in cartel work in the NLS. It was referred to a question in the reading group. Apart from the structural differences and their ramifications, is there a qualitative difference between inscribing oneself to the trait in the cartel and the development of a particularized question in a reading group? While the reading group also has a subject effect, it has something of a different reverberation. It may be that the qualitative difference between one's question and a trait is linked to the structural effect of the cartel on the subject and the trait's written inscription, not just in the cartel, but its register with the school as other. Just finally, what I call a non-conclusion. While the incompleteness of knowledge persists and insists, the space of the cartel has offered me a particular kind of nothing. It's a space where there's no apprenticeship of knowledge except that which is with the object. It is with the object, cause of desire, that we learn what concerns us. It is desire which produces a meaning, which orientates. Thank you. Yeah. Caroline. Okay.
No, Linda.
Sorry,
That's all right.
Linda.
It's okay.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Rose. Already, I think in Brian's introduction was this paper, there'll be a lot of overlapping and interweaving Obviously, that's important to bear in mind, but I suppose it's not unusual as each one is coming to those points of intersection from a different place. So firstly, I'd like to begin by thanking the ICLO-NLS cartel delegates, that's Eva, Sophie, Reinhofer, and Roz here who's by my side, for the invitation to participate in today's ICLO-NLS Cartel Day. I also wish to thank Lacanian, chair of ICLO, for her introduction of us all this morning. So the title of the text that I've written for today is Cartel, not, again playing with the K, inverted burkas, without the school. And I suppose, like everybody who produces a text, it was more for myself that I wrote this. So I know from my own, and it's, sorry, I'm a little bit anxious. I want to say hello to everybody who's out there. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I see some not so familiar faces, some new faces. So hello. It's very nice to meet you all, and for those in the room also. But so just to say that I know from my experience that being in a cartel can strengthen a fledgling transference towards psychoanalysis. It can also be the first step towards commencing an analysis, an analytic formation, and a school. Joining a cartel can be a call on one's desire to know. The reason for joining a cartel is singular to each one. Reasons can vary according to the logical time of one's analysis, which is not unrelated to an interest in psychoanalytic theory. I was invited to join a cartel many years ago, not really understanding what I was getting involved in. What followed proved to be a different kind of encounter, a different experience. For one, there was a different discourse in play to the one from which I had just come. The analytic discourse in place of the university discourse. Contrary to passive learning received from the other, instead, there was a forcing of sorts through transference to actively participate in thinking and deliberating about psychoanalysis, its theory and praxis. Each working on their own particular question, a process of sustained elaboration, working against the various discourses from which each had come. It is a work that one has to consent to, which was not always a given. To gradually understand over the course of many cartel experiences that for psychoanalysis, everything cannot be known, only that one has to start out from a position of wanting to know. Just as in an analysis, in the experience of cartels too, there is anguish, there are enigmas, puzzles, perplexities, and impasses, and lots of banging one's head against walls. There are surprises too. Cartels bring together analysis, theory, and praxis, and allow for a singular knotting with one's own questions. To consent to be part of a cartel is to pierce a knowledge already constituted. It is to divide oneself from one's previous beliefs, to gain a little more on one's not wanting to know anything about it. It is my experience in each effort of work, in each cartel, it is always for the subject to attempt anew, to find a new way to circumscribe the whole of knowledge, the whole found at the heart of the analytic experience, the whole at the heart of the school, each time from a different place. Of course, it is only après coup that I can now speak of that initial encounter and what I discovered in the experience. Time has since passed, and I've experienced working in more than a few cartels. For today, I'd like to focus on the cartel and the school. These are two signifiers that are, at least for me, inherently difficult to define beyond the descriptive. How to say something about each that does not consist in the observation of objective facts or resorting to a history lesson. What is a cartel? What is a school? What is there not in? Answering these questions more than 50 years later, referring to Lacan's Founding Act, may seem a bit obvious. Yet, I would suggest that the issues at the heart of both are not so simple. As Miller points out, and I'm quoting him here, because the cartel is contemporary with the creation of the school, we can assume that it is congruent with the concept of the school. Why does Miller say this? It seems to me that it points to the institutional and political issues that were at stake at the moment of the institution of Lacan's first school. Let us not forget the crisis that happened in the analytical community that led Lacan to create his own school. He needed an original and unprecedented device that distinguished his school from other society of psychoanalysts, a device that would verify his theory, his thinking, his style, and his ethics. 1964 saw Lacan break from the International Psychoanalytical Association, the IPA, to found his own school. Breaking from the IPA is also for Lacan a breaking from Freud, insofar as it was the institution that Freud had formed. We could say that Freud's desire was tied to Oedipus because the society that he formed had the same structure as the savage horde gathered around the primordial father. Lacan, on the other hand, testifies to his singular desire by stating, as alone as I've always been in my relation to the psychoanalytic cause, a striking statement that takes the analytic cause beyond Oedipus and creates not a band of brothers as in Totem and Taboo, but rather a school. A school not based on the exception, but as Miller tells us, on an ensemble, or rather a series of exceptions, of solitudes incomparable to each other. Lacan presents himself not as a subject who proposes himself as an ideal, but rather as a subject who has a relation to an ideal, like others whom Lacan invites to join him in his school. As Miller puts it, to quote him, at the very moment when Lacan institutes a collective formation, his first words aim to disassociate and to bring out this subjective solitude that we've all referred to this morning. A collective formation which does not pretend to make subjective solitude disappear, but which, on the contrary, founds itself upon it, manifests it, reveals it. This is the paradox of the school. Putting forward the juxtaposition of the singular and the collective, the community of solitudes that constitutes the school and which always operates at the very heart of the cartel itself. Concurrent with the break from the IPA and the founding of his school, Lacan began Seminar 11, the 4 fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis, in which he spoke of the training of analysts. In this same year, in the Founding Act, Lacan also poses the question of what is an institution, a psychoanalytic institution. We could say that 2 periods mark the birth of Lacan's school. In the first time, in 1964, we have the Founding Act of the school, and in the second time, we have the proposition of the 9th of October 1967 on the psychoanalyst of the school. The time in between, Miller suggests, is a logical one that moves from the act to the proposition, act and proposition not being the same thing. It is notable that in the definition of the school in 1964, there is nothing that defines a psychoanalyst. Instead, what is found in the place of the definition of what a psychoanalyst is a hole that was not filled by Lacan and that will later be inscribed by the proposition on the psychoanalyst of the school. Quoting Lacan, those who entered this school will undertake to fulfill a task that is subject to both internal and external supervision. In exchange, they are assured that nothing will be spared in order that anything valuable they do gets the attention it deserves and in the appropriate place. To carry out this work, we shall adopt the principle of sustained elaboration in small groups. Each group, cartel, will be composed of at least 3 people, 5 at most, 4 is the right balance, plus 1 responsible for the selection, the discussion, and the outcome to be accorded to the work of each. So Lacon presents the small group, the cartel, as the pathway to join the school. This small group is also the institution that Lacon creates, on which the school rests. The school rests on an organ, a basic organ, that is to say, a working group, an organ organized to carry out work. To put it another way, the school as a body that has as its aim the accomplishment of work. And as Miller tells us, the only specified institution is the cartel that executes the work. Here, what is made clear is that the cartel is an incentive to work, a signifier that is repeated throughout, an incentive to work subject to certain conditions, that the work is individual, it is one by one, it must pass through the internal supervision of the cartel and the external supervision of the school. In this way, the products of the work are made known within the school. Miller further clarifies in his text, The Cartel in the World, that the cartel, which is this small group, is a means of carrying out work. It is not an end in itself. Yes, but it is not exactly a means either. Lacon says rather that it is the means, not to carry out our work, but to carry out their work. The means to carry out their work with the definite article. This sentence means, if we read it carefully, says Miller, that the work of the school goes through the cartel. The cartel, designated as the working means of the school, highlights that the work of the school passes through the cartel and not through courses, symposiums, conferences, events, and so on. The working objective of the school is inseparable from a training to be dispensed. It's a quote. The teaching in Lacon School is not the teaching of the master or university discourse. It's a strange form of teaching, which is at the same time an inventing. A teaching which is an invention brought to life via the mechanism of the cartel and the pass. Both are very different ways of circumscribing the whole, that is the question of what is a psychoanalyst. Analysts are not taught or trained by other analysts. Instead, they are formed by their own analysis, as Lacon declares in the proposition. Pure psychoanalysis has as its goal to produce an analyst, to pass from supposed knowledge to exposed knowledge. The pass is a procedure that Lacon proposed in his school as a way of demonstrating a formation based on the principle of self-authorization. In this way, the work of the analyst of the school is also woven into the life of the school, insofar as by testifying to what is at stake for each. To quote Lacon, to testify to crucial problems for psychoanalysis. The analyst of the school provides a teaching, producing new knowledge which advances psychoanalysis. The past is also a work in progress, just like the work of the cartel. Why? Because knowledge in psychoanalysis is never complete or absolute, but knowledge withholds bits and pieces, just like the real. It is therefore a knowledge crossed by the real of the subject that speaks. Moreover, it is a cartel of the past that nominates the analyst of the school. This further demonstrates the place of the cartel at the foundation of the school. Like the +1 who takes up the function of the one who interprets the cartel, that is, interprets the group effects that can arise. The analyst of school interprets the school. Why? Because, as Miller states in the Turin theory of the subject, school, the school is a subject. This subject is determined by the signifiers of which it is the effect, since it is what determines a subject and nothing else. It is for this reason that the act of situating the signifiers that determine the school is an absolute responsibility, since it is an act of interpretation, operating on the subject through the bias of speech. It is a school that has a mission with regard to truth and duty, and which fundamentally is defined as an organism where work must be accomplished, an organism that dispenses formation and assures a reconquest of the Freudian field, says Miller. Therefore, the cartel is not without a school. It constitutes its very fabric. Such is the knotting of the school and the cartel. Sinead?
Here we go. We open it up to any questions for a few minutes before we hear the next two speakers.
Any questions or comments? Alexandra, I think, has raised her hand. Caroline? Alexandra, I see somebody has raised their hand, I think. I don't know. Don't know, Alexandra, did you want to unmute yourself? And
Maybe I can ask a question.
Hello.
oh, hi.
Hi. Sorry, apologies. I cannot have my camera on. My internet is struggling a lot, so I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I actually have 3 questions, so I'm gonna be brief.
Just 3.
Yeah, and you know, if anyone wants to take them up or not. The first one was I think when Caroline was speaking, and I think she was referring to Miller, and she was talking about the school as a collective formation that founds itself on a singular loneliness, and that was in terms of jouissance and the signifier. Sorry, you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine, thanks.
Yeah.
And I also wondered, could this apply to the kind of loneliness of the analytic act? You know, the loneliness of that contingency. That was kind of my first question, and because obviously thinking about the link between the cartel and the school. My second question is, which I think was Roz, but apologies if I've got it mixed up. I think you mentioned something about the Iliad and a connection with the +1. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that. And then my third kind of question, which I think was also in what you were saying, Roz, was, now if I understood well, yeah, I think you mentioned about the hysteric discourse of the cartel in relation, if I understood well, yeah, in relation to insatisfaction. And I just was curious about this because it's a question, you know, to think about a discourse of the cartel being hysteric. Yes, perhaps the thought was in terms of a divided subject and so on, but I was curious about this in relation to the hysterics, relation to lack and to knowledge, and the kind of production of knowledge that say would come in a hysteric discourse. So I was kind of curious about that for a cartel with its, I don't know, perhaps slightly different relation to knowledge, but it's a question. Anyway, that is enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. I mean, what I would hope is that I can say something about that, but that also that if other people have comments, because we see this morning as one of sort of participation and discussion, I think not just amongst by the speakers, but by other people, both on Zoom and here present in the room. So I can make some comment, but yeah, happy if people would elaborate further on that. When I made the reference between the ADLA and the +1, I mean, what struck me was that there was something of the one present in when he wrote the Founding Act in '64. And that it was that there was something, so that it introduced into the discourse of the cartel something of the one, but there's something of the one in the +1 as well, as it were, that was and I think I go on to say that the +1 also has their own question. And that I think is one of the significant differences in the effect of the cartel. I thought about that. Rick, yeah?
Yeah, and there is another way perhaps of talking about it. I'm referring it too.
Okay.
And that is that
Do you want to sit down?
in the discourse of hysteria, if you take the discourse of hysteria, the hysteric forces the master. So it's the barred subject that addresses the one in the master position, whether that's a professor or a psychiatrist or whatever, to produce knowledge. But it's a knowledge that is impotent in relation to what truly matters in terms of, let's say, the cause, the object in psychoanalysis. So why it is hysterical is, or why Miller makes that point, that there is an aspect of hysteria in the role of the +1 and thus the cartel, is precisely that one of the functions of the +1 is to put a finger on this impotence, on this real, so to speak, this what does not work, or where knowledge finds its limit. That's what the effect of hysteria.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Anybody else like to make a comment?
Can I respond?
Yeah, sure.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
So Caroline, I wanted to intervene, but it's coupled, so I have to turn it off. Sorry.
Okay.
Sound.
Alexandra, I was just going to, you said something about the subjective loneliness. And I suppose, I'm not sure if I can recall your question, but perhaps, yes, I thank you. The loneliness of the Analytic Act, because I suppose my understanding is that we're always alone with our jouissance. And it's with our work, not without others, that we can do something with our desire. Francia, you wanted to? Sorry.
Yeah.
You'll have to come here. You have to.
Come and sit here, yeah.
The only sound is from here.
Okay.
Okay. No, I just wanted to add to the very precise remark, question from Alexandra in relation to the hysteric discourse, because beyond the fact that Miller formalized this in relation to the cartel, I mean, he formalized it as a question. Yeah, that's very important. But also, I think I wanted to thank Roz and Linda, because I think Roz demonstrated very well in her writing from her own experience of participating in small group, reading group or cartel, what are the subjective effects of the fact that is conceived in the master's discourse the S1, to go back to the question of the one, commanding the production, yeah, versus the divided subject commanding the production. And I think in the knotting that Linda produced, it's very clear also why, and I owe this to the work that I've been able to do in a cartel, of which Ganesh is a participant precisely on hysteria. So I thank my fellow cartelisans for this work. Why it is the case that no analysis can happen without a historization. So thank you both.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, and for all the moving around. Many thanks.
Yeah, we have to.
It's
figure out the
participation.
technicals.
Participation.
Gets the bodies moving.
Sheila, did you want to ask a question? And then I think we
take a break.
Consent to work, as you mentioned, and also singular solitude, I think that's.
Yeah.
I suppose the importance of those sentences, sometimes we don't fully appreciate what.
sure.
Maybe you want to add more or not.
No, I think it is, because I think part of the reason I don't want to speak for us, but in reflecting on our own experiences of being in cartel, and I remember encountering cartel and not really having an understanding of what a cartel was, and that takes a time, I will say, because it's subject to each one alone in that, and it's exactly that you don't even realize the loneliness of the encounter that you have each time. But also, I suppose it makes me think about which became more clear to me in rereading what I read for today, to produce the text for today, about Lacan's act and how the lonely act and it was an act on founding the school, and of course, and desire. And how they're inextricably linked. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Come up, Alan.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Yes. Just to say something very brief, because I think the papers we've heard this morning have been terrific. And one of the things that they've brought out in a really helpful way is the distinction, let's say, between knowledge and what psychoanalysis is interested in. When we think of knowledge, we have to think of it as totalizing knowledge. What one seeks there is a totalizing knowledge, a consistent knowledge. Most evident, for example, in philosophical systems, or in religion. And the reason that this knowledge is sought after is that behind, or let's say this knowledge is sought for a reason, and the reason is that it gives you a way of life. So most obviously in religion, it gives you a way of life. It tells you how to live, how life should be organized, what satisfactions are legitimate or not. And of course, psychoanalysis has a totally different focus, and we've heard this in the papers. It is an encounter with, one could say, the signifiers that have marked one. It's an encounter with the singularity of one's jouissance. So it creates a hole in this idea of knowledge. And as our speakers have said, it's exactly why, as a community, we are a community of ones. And I just think, well, my comment is just that has been very well illustrated so far. So, yeah.
Thanks, Alan.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I think.
we're going to have a few minutes.
We're going to give you all
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah.
a 5-minute coffee break, so it's literally 5 minutes.
Does anybody need a 5-minute break? Does anybody need a 5-minute break? You do? Yeah, I do. Okay.
And then Rick and Ava will.
Okay, but literally 5 minutes.
Literally.
Literally.
You want to go to it?
Yeah, that would be good.
No, you can take them.
Hi, how are you?
I don't know how many times I rewrote my text. And this is my name.
I can do that.
Spelled here. The control F.
Yeah.
Permutation.
That's a nice word, a foffer.
Oh,
She's a foffer.
what's my phone for?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Okay.
There is no foffer.
There's a fight.
Wow, there was, yeah. Is this still on or
No, I think it's not.
what was it?
No, it's not.
That would be good. That's Cartel.
Okay.
When do we start? Yeah. So, okay. Okay, will I start then? Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's start with the second part. I also want to thank Eva and Ross for organizing this, and of course the Bureau as well, and everyone here and everyone on Zoom. So I'm going to talk about, well, it says introductory notes, some notes on cartels, but I gave that title a number of weeks ago, but it's actually, once you start thinking about it and working on it, the content changes, and perhaps it would be better to say some contexts internally to the cartels, but also context in the sense of, let's say, the kind of culture that we live in. So that's the kind of comments I would like to make, and I was encouraged to speak about a number of points, exactly 20 I made, which I had extracted from an article by Frank Rollier, and I'll mention the article, À l'envers de la ségrégation, which was published in 2015, and he presented this in Lausanne. I extracted, as I said, 20 points from it that I presented, literally just a list, and I was encouraged to revisit the list. And then I thought, to say exactly the same thing, no. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 12 points of those lists, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. I'm going to give it a little bit of context again, internally as well as externally to the cartels. So I'm going to give these points some twists and some elaborations, of course, which are related to my own experiences. I will make one or two comments about my own experiences in a recent cartel, and of course my own reading and conversations with colleagues. So I start with the first point, and again, some of these will have come up in the various really interesting papers that came up before, and I will also make a comment on or revisit something that Alan said. I will also go back to something that came up here 2 weeks ago. I say it because, of course, there is a good few that weren't there at the time. So apologies to those who were there. That is a repetition, by the way. For the first point, so we're going to look at 12 points. First point, a cartel is against the modern movement of segregation. Everyone can speak and is given that opportunity. So what's at stake here? In our era, we don't believe much in the other anymore. And one of the responses is to find safety and security in segregation. For example, a very obvious example is gated communities, and there's many more, of course. I'm going to give an example of this that was recently in the news. So when you don't believe in the other anymore, or less, that which is other can become something of a threat. And you could say this is the other as real, the other of jouissance. See here, for example, racism, but I'm not going to go down that route. So here comes what I recently read in one of the, I think it was the Observer 2 weekends ago, an article by a man called Douglas Rushkoff. He's a Marxist theorist from New York, and he was invited by a group of tech billionaires to meet them as a group in the desert. It's interesting. Not in San Francisco or in Seattle, but in the desert, in the middle of the desert. So here, actually, he says in the newspaper article, he says he arrives in the desert, and at the same time his plane arrives, a private jet comes down, and that's obviously one of the tech billionaires. And then he says, had an inkling of what was going on. They consulted him. That's why they invited him. They consulted him. They wanted to know how to best respond to the looming climate change disaster and the potential societal problems emanating or associated with this. So then during the conversation, he began to realize that their topic for the meeting was how to survive a possible catastrophic event. All they wanted, he wrote, is to escape a disaster of their own making, he says, through breaking the laws of economics, morality, and so they are now financing missions to Mars. They're financing AI futurism, and they have already built numerous island bunkers. That's segregation. About which Jacques-Alain Miller says it's two breasts are suprematism and separatism. I think this is well illustrated by Rushkoff's experience. The point really is that the cartels do not operate that way, and if anything at all, it subverts that. Another response, indeed, so therefore, is the cartel. Here you're given an opportunity to speak to others on the basis of a certain kind of freedom. And this precise point brings us to the second point. So the second point is everyone takes responsibility for his or her own task. And this has come up in various presentations this morning. Okay, so this aforementioned freedom, the end of point 1, can only be freedom if it is to some extent regulated. I.e., it is not the freedom, let's say, of the free markets, it's not the freedom of neoliberalism. For the cartel, that means that you speak, amongst other things, in relation to the task you've taken on board. Again, it came up in both presentations. However, this regulation, it must be stated, is not the restrictions on speech inspired by the woke movement. Although, it has to be said, very often it concerns very admirable causes. The regulation in the cartels relates to the impossibility of harmonizing the fact that it is the real that makes us want to speak. We're a response of the real. That makes us want to speak, with the inability to absorb this real within that speech. We are the dupe of the real, as Miller says. Point 3. Crises are dealt with and each desire is mobilized. So yes, the cartels, it has been said, is a question of mobilizing desire, amongst other things. It's very important. So crises are dealt with and each desire is mobilized. Why? Of course, a crisis often propels one to start an analysis, but that does not necessarily mean that there is a desire for analysis. Indeed, that needs to be mobilized, and then the analyst can consent to an analysis. So what about the cartel? The cartel, as has been said, has no master. So when there is no one to take up that position, only then will people question their own subjective difficulties. If there is a master present who explains everything, who you want your questions answered by, then you avoid any subjective crisis or difficulty in that sense. Which in the case of the cartel concerns how each cartelisant responds to a knowledge that never completes itself, as has been said. And so the crisis is not the crisis of an analysis. The crisis is in relation to a knowledge that does not complete itself. But also how each cartelisant especially responds to the difficulties of the text. Why not say this? In the cartel, there is no one who has no difficulties with dancing with the signifiers of Lacan. Is it okay or okay? And this then leads to the next point, point 4. In the cartel, everyone speaks and partakes under his or her own name. Again, that was mentioned in one of the papers. Here I will say something briefly about something that came up in a cartel I participate in which we are reading television, Lacan's television. Despite the title suggesting something superficial, presumably most of you will be familiar with the text. It's a difficult text. At least it's difficult for me. I said to the cartel that I had read the piece we were going to work on and understood little of it. But through everyone speaking under his or her own name, saying what he or she had to say about the text, there was an effect on each of us, in the sense that we were able to enter the text, which when reading on my own did not happen for me. The surprise comes with or in the saying, rather than the said, or indeed that which is written you read. Point 5. The cartel is also the place of surprise. At the heart of the cartel, again, this was mentioned in various presentations, a hole in knowledge, the real, and the +1 relates the cartel to this real. That's one of the functions of the +1. So Lacan puts discourse and speech at the forefront of the constitution of the subject. And that means that the advent of the subject starts from a lack of being. The subject is only represented by a signifier for another signifier. The implication is that the subject starts from a not knowing of what a human is. Lacan then organizes the cartels around this logic. And what is a consequence of this? And the consequence of this, that Lacan organizes the cartels around this logic, leads us to point 6. And that is that the cartel functions horizontally. When our starting point is a non-knowledge, and this starting point is maintained, not least by the +1. Again, as I say, that's one of the, apart from the interpretation, that I think was mentioned by Linda of group effects, it is this aiming at this non-knowledge. So if the +1 is able to maintain that function, it's not always so easy, then a horizontal identification is what ensues from that. Now, what does that mean? It means we're all equal in relation to this point, but none of us are the same in relation to it. This concerns, as Lacan says, the realism of the group. Equality is when our relationship to this whole, this real, is different for everyone. To maintain this equality, it is necessary that the following takes place, which brings us to point 7. The cartel has no leader but a +1. Work in a cartel is so crucial for a formation in psychoanalysis because it encourages a relationship to knowledge that is different than the one from the university. Again mentioned, and Alan spoke about it. The university can transmit knowledge. Of course, that's its function. It transmits or teaches knowledge that may be of a not all structure. After all, we teach psychoanalysis in the university in various places. And so we teach the real and the not all, the logic of the not all, and so on. But it does it in a way that it hides this structure, the structure that Alan referred to of knowledge in psychoanalysis. It hides this logic of the not all. Precisely by the way it transmits this knowledge to the students. This implies something crucial. As a student, you absorb this knowledge, but you do not experience it like you do in the cartel. So, university discourse, Jacques Lemaitre says this, is the subject who knows and does. And I find this very, very interesting. His paper was quoted a few times by various people this morning. I don't have it here, on the variations of what's the title again? Yes, that's it. Yeah. Yes, where he says the teaching in the university revokes elaboration. So why does it revoke it? Precisely because it does not do an appeal on your desire. It fulfills it. And oh yeah, I was going to write it down, the discourse of the university. Yes, so I hope you can see. So this is the discourse of the university, where knowledge is in the place of agent and addresses the student who receive this knowledge. But what it produces is the subject. That's the product, the end product of the discourse of the university. So what Miller says in that article, which I found really interesting, and I hadn't read it before, and I read it again, and it just struck me reading it second time, is that it revokes elaboration and it produces provokers. That's really, really interesting, because what it produces is precisely, well, there is something else. And what's also interesting in some of the things that I read is that prior to Lacan in 1964 instituting the cartel, I think it's Frank Rollier or Philippe Lacade who said it. I was only reading this yesterday, so I didn't actually take it down. Is that that the students in the Sorbonne had already organized little cartels. So it's interesting. Eh? So they to provoke the system of lecturing and the kind of knowledge that was taught in the university. Anyway, so as I said, this knowledge that we deal with in the cartel, you do not experience it in the university, but you do experience it in the cartel, and it's not always so easy. But it's an aspect of the function of the +1 to guide this, as it were, and to allow and make it happen to an extent. This function is that the relationship to this not all, the whole, is maintained. The +1, as Jacques-Alain Miller indicates, is, and again, this has been said, is a desiring and a divided subject who animates the others to produce something. That's that Miller says is akin to the discourse of hysteria. So, is it hysterical, as Florentia was saying? So is the question for Jacques-Alain Miller. Indeed, it puts you to work, provokes your enthusiasm, and guarantees the cartel is alive, such that no one is mortified by knowledge, because the kind of knowledge in the university has a mortifying effect on students, such that they come to protest against it. So, the knowledge that is produced by the discourse of hysteria, you know, that knowledge can be mortifying. And so again, back to the question, you know, can we say that the cartel is hysterical? Not quite, no. Something else happens in the cartel. So there's as was mentioned again, the whirlpool around the whole dimension with an H rather than a W, by provoking the point in the subject where knowledge comes to hold or find its limit. That's very important function of the +1. Point 8, cartel work, and this is where I apologize to those who were there in our inaugural event when I wrote something in response to one of the papers. Cartel work is not related to information. And again, Alan made that point in his response. Information is potentially unlimited. Here in the cartel, knowledge is limited. Even the cartel itself is limited. So if the cartel consists of 2, then we have too much of the imaginary dimension. If it's more than 4, leadership tendencies become too much and perhaps cannot be curtailed so well by the +1. And so, as I say, I will return to what I talked about. I'll do it a little briefer 2 weeks ago, and I refer here to Geert Hoornaert and an article he wrote in relation to Lacan in Italy. This hasn't come out yet in English, this book, but it's in French. For Freud, we suffer from 3 sources: our bodies, the other, and nature. Of course, in terms of taming nature, we've done incredibly well with science. Science has made unbelievable progress. However, regarding understanding people, we have not made progress, Freud says. So we've made incredible progress mastering nature, but not in terms of the subject, not in terms of people. Freud says in Civilization and Its Discontents, it has not made people happier. Science has an impact on nature, but not on the subject. And Lacan says it is generally accepted in the philosophy of science that began by calculating and measuring the stars in the sky, that science began by measuring and calculating the stars in the sky. That's how modern science began. So the mystery was that one way or another, these stars always turn up at the same place. So let's calculate them, let's measure them. The beginning of modern science. So then when we turned our telescope of our knowledge acquisition to the other way around, and lo and behold, it became a microscope, with which we began to look at the Earth and the small particles on Earth, things became a little bit more problematic. In other words, the laws of science are based on the laws that apply to the stars. And what are these laws based on? That things again turn up in the same place with the regularity of day and night, the regularity of the clock. But they're also based on the fact that the material and data we have access to, i.e. the knowledge that we can potentially acquire, is precisely unlimited because the universe is unlimited. The question is, does all of this apply to the planet and the speaking beings that inhabit it? And Regarding the planet, we can say that it is limited, but we can add that with the products and the effects of science, we have made this planet even more limited, to the point of speaking beings becoming overwhelmed and anxious. To paraphrase a well-known musician, I won't mention his name, stars in the sky, they never lie. But of course, humans do, and that is their truth. And these humans commit parapraxis, and they commit errors, while stars never do. I don't need to mention, of course, that they don't exist anymore. Hornat makes the point on the basis of Lacan that the laws of the unlimited universe do not apply to our very limited planet, but also not to, as Freud indicated, to speaking beings. Freud discovered, to use Lacan's words, that there is a real, a sexual real, whose dupe we are. For Lacan, what is not logically written in the stars is the sexual relation. The real is not the real of science. So what exactly is this real of science? It's a real whose dupe it thinks we don't need to be. We think we can conquer this real as long as we think we have unlimited access to data, scientific data, which is information. It's not for nothing that one speaks in scientific circles of blue sky research. The daylight will throw light on the issue. So the real of science is not the real of the subject, nor the realism of the cartel. But as Frank Rollier says, the real of the cartel, the latter two reals, the real of the subject and the real of the cartel, aren't the same either. So we have the real of science, we have the real of the subject, and we have the real of the cartel. And that brings us to the third last point, point 9. It's important to say that the real that operates in the cartel is not the real of the subject, Rollier says. This latter, the real of the subject, is for one's own analysis. The real of the cartel is the real in knowledge. And it concerns a radical singularity. The real of the subject concerns a radical singularity, but the real of the cartel concerns the real in terms of the limited knowledge. The real in knowledge as the limit that language inherently carries within itself. The knowledge from information technology is modeled on the knowledge we gained from the night sky. Namely, it concerns a knowledge that is eminently calculable and unlimited. And that's exactly what happens in information technology. This kind of accumulatable information can have a mortifying effect on the subject, which brings us to our next point, 10. Lacan made the cartel the organ of the school. It's alive and it pulsates. And that's a point that Linda spoke very precisely and very well about. I'll be brief. An organ in a living body is alive, and depending on what kind of organ it is, it can pulsate. Not all organs pulsate. Can we say that the school is a body? Yes, in that it collects speaking bodies in all their diversities. So what prevents this kind of body and these bodies it collects from being mortified? The fact that it is concerned with the real of the school and the real of the speaking body and the real of the cartel that will not be pacified by the consumption of information. That's what prevents it. So that's also a function, I think, of the, I wasn't saying that here, but of the +1, that knowledge doesn't have a mortifying effect. It's not about information. All life is there in the cartels, and thus the cartels can make us be surprised. It can make us laugh. It can make us bored. It can make us irritable and invigorated. Laurent has written about this in actually a really funny passage, but I'm not going to quote that here. The cartel cannot make you happy. Like psychoanalysis, the cartel does not promise happiness. Happiness relates to a state of feeling without a remainder. And if there is a remainder, there is a desire. And desire is never comfortable, as we know. What we can encounter in the cartels is enthusiasm, though. So what is this enthusiasm? It's making something of the real resonate in the word, according to Miller. Cartels can function such that they form a hinge between knowledge and the real, and also a hinge between the cartelisant and the school, as Linda explained so well. In cartels, above all, we speak, and to allow something of this real resonate in that speech, that creates the possibilities for moments of enthusiasm. This makes the cartel stand out very much apart from education. So again, education does not lead to work or to elaboration, but as Miller says, to provocation. Education produces provocateurs. Maybe that's why education is important, of course, because you need to be able to provoke against. 11, second last one, so I'm nearly finished. The cartel is a machine against the didactician or educationalist. Why? You cannot teach the real and it escapes the grasp of information, which will only put you to sleep. All life is in the cartel because it's real if it's allowed to function by the +1. And one of the functions of the +1 is to wake up. And this brings us to our last point. One cannot parade as master because the cartel is the other side of the university discourse. One of the functions of the +1 is to interpret the one who is parading as master. This interpretation is not just aimed at the one, but also the others. Because as you know well, every master finds its students, or slave in fact, who in a university type structure are in the position of the studied, the students, the studied, the object of study. He says that in seminar 17. In other words, the +1 encourages the transference of the work, thus also, to say it again, makes the cartel function in relation to the school, a school that is not complete, whose desire makes one work. So I'll finish by saying the cartel is above all a tool to help us struggle against the death drive in our culture and within ourselves. I may be wrong, but I would consider our addiction to information a form of death drive. So I finish there. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank all of you who are present in person and on Zoom to be listening to us and to be with us. I would like to thank Fleur and Chair Caroline and all the speakers to give us this kind of very extraordinary space. Well, I've titled my paper short, One Lung, and it's more like an aperçu, like you would say in French, like an impression of my relation to what I experienced via cartel, but from my, obviously kind of from my point of view. As alone as I've always been, said Lacan in the Founding Act in 1964. This as alone as I've always been really struck me. Lacan's solitude struck me, and it touched something really deep in me. It reminded me of De Profundis Clamavi, the Psalm 130 in the Bible, which has inspired many authors, to just name a few, Baudelaire, Oscar Wilde. So a solitude born from the word that echoes in the instance of the letter, where Lacan says it was the abyss open to the thought that the thought might make itself heard in the abyss. As I was attempting to write this text, I felt a glimpse of the solitude, and maybe more than a glimpse. I had a text, but not the text.
Mm-hmm.
Something of its materiality, I can't even say the word, slipped away like an apparition, like a mirage. solitude and anguish at being faced to that place of not knowing, and not both with a K and without. When and from where in the knotting of the text something would emerge, bringing to the fore the nothingness of its texture like a mocking skull, while being knotted to it. Just as Penelope, waiting for Ulysses, who duped the suitors by unraveling her weaving every night, I duped myself unknotting the knots of the texture. But there is no unknotting that does not leave a trace. Its space will always stay where the thing has been. So, cartel work with one lung. Lacan considered the cartel, as was said before, as one of the two lungs of the school, or organs. One organ, to quote Dominique Olivet, that makes the school lively or moribund if the organ is sick. The other lung is the past, and at the moment the lung of the past is breathless. It has been put on hold by the ECL. What does that mean for the cartel lung? Well, in pulmonary rehab, patients are taught to gently exercise and pay attention to their breathing. Gently. The real of the pandemic, the real of the war in Ukraine, to just name a few, have created pell-mell and anxiety. Certainties have become uncertain, knowing became not knowing. Things appeared that we have not seen coming. Things emerged that we had not seen before. Veils lifted to show what? What else lies hidden? One synonym of pell-mell, which by the way, I took that firstly from French and then realized that it's an English word too, is complete disorder. Another is every which way. Complete disorder and every which way, the oxymoron of complete disorder rattles. There's something unheimlich, uncanny about complete disorder and every which way. As Freud has shown in Das Unheimliche, the uncanny, unheimlich plays with that vacillation between heimlich, which is cozy, familiar, and unheimlich, uncanny, because unfamiliar. Like with an ambiguous figure, once we have seen the full spectrum or the specter of the word, we cannot unsee it anymore. The space of the cartel. The cartel is a space of ambiguity. The cartel is a space of not knowing, both with a K and without, in its formation and in its being. A space of embracing the not. A space to not something from nothing. Where's the door into that space? Who speaks and from where? Who knows? Each and everyone's entering is unique and other. It is about desire. Desire, that evanescent thing. Desire, as Lacan wrote somewhere, as that which we can glimpse at furtively, but only if you look the other way. Desire as that explosive matter, as Daniel Roy said, and John Conway wrote a beautiful article on the cartel and the desire of the school on that explosiveness of desire. So how does desire work with one lung? Lightly, gently, very gently. Urgency of time and desire. The other day, a colleague wrote to me those beautiful words when I was hasty and wanted to rush her to answers. Be indulgent with us. We just began. We will find our rhythm. The double sense of indulgence only occurred to me afterwards. Indulgence as the payment to pay off time from purgatory, the in-between space, the gap. This space can be difficult to bear. Well, it's a burning and a risky space. There is the temptation to fill the hole, to make it one thing, or to simply pay it off. However, that would kill the sparks of desire. There is an art in minding the flames. To cite Lacan, it is in following the path of the letter to reach the Freudian truth that we are getting hot. Its flame spreading all around us. So to repeat, be indulgent. Knowing will emerge from that space of not knowing. We cordially invite you to create not knowing spaces of incomplete disorder.
Okay, do you want to
Just open it up
address?
to questions.
Yeah. So, do you want to say something to the Zoom audience?
Okay, just give me one breath with my lung. So yeah, so obviously kind of I have been the last speaker today, so now the floor is open to each and everyone to ask questions or anything that sparked your desire to just share it with us.
Want to make a quick comment, something that didn't come up today in terms of the functioning of the cartels, which I think, or well, maybe I missed it, but I think it's important to emphasize in that case that the rotation, in terms of what you said, Eva, I think it's a very good point you make, that we tend to want to fill this hole, of course, and one way of doing it is with knowledge in the sense of imaginary effects, and so cartels last a year, maximum 2 years, and they have to rotate. This is really a very important function. Lacan insists on it. It's absolutely necessary that happens, precisely to stop that filling of the holes and the holes in the head from happening.
It's even more than that, because at least.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying it's even more than that, because there is the practice in the schools of, not in all schools, but it's something that we can ask ourselves, where there is a tirage au sort,
Like a lottery.
like a lottery draw.
Oh yeah, yes.
Where people put their names, and that is something very interesting to think about, because of course we tend to reproduce the logic of the various discourses that you so well wrote about, Rick. And we tend to ask someone to be a +1 because there is a supposition, or we tend to choose to work with our friends and the people we get along better with, and to avoid others.
Yeah.
So really, it's such a powerful weapon, the cartel. And I think, thank you, Eva, for how beautifully you wrote about it and you spoke about it. I will just make one little remark in relation to one of your points, Rick, when you highlight the function of, this is something that Jacques Alain Miller has written about as well, the function of the cartel and the pass as weapons or machines, anti-didactician, which means anti-hierarchy.
Yes.
So basically, the machine anti-didactician means, in the tradition of the IPA, but not only, you find it in other groupings that call themselves Lacanian, the idea of the training analyst. That's what didactician means. So you find, even in groupings that call themselves Lacanian, people who present themselves as training analysts or as supervisors, for example. This is completely outside of the logic of Lacan's inventions, as you so clearly presented to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Francia.
Yeah, just to add to that, because it just when you said like tirage au sort, the aleatory, because alias jactas es, that's kind of the dice as well, which is also something very final, like the death thing as well. So the aleatory being like the permutation, but also the dice that is thrown. And there's a hand, so Ganesh is raising his hand. I hope I pronounced the name correctly.
Yes, you have. And okay, I would first like to say a big thank you to ICLO because it has been a series of firsts for me in my, encounters with psychoanalysis, which have always been with ICLO. My first full-fledged cartel has Florencia as the +1. My first today, here and now, this is my first experience of attending a mixed in-person and Zoom event. And I do want to say it's been a very seamless experience for me on Zoom, participating from India. So thank you for that too. I have two, I think, thoughts to offer. I mean, they are more what I'm thinking about right now, which is, I think for the first time today, I am beginning to think about what it means to see the cartel as the organ of the working group rather than a device of the school. I think it's an important shift. And the second thought that I have is, the theme of aloneness and solitude, very beautifully captured in all the speakers' presentations. Solitude, not necessarily, or solitude as distinct from isolation. Aloneness not equaling isolation, and I think that's the power of the cartel. So I think thank you all.
And thank you very much, Ganesh, for your really interesting comments. Do you want to say something?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for stretching your time because I don't know what time it is. And
Yes, that's a good point.
Sure it's somewhere in the middle of the night or.
No, it's not too bad. This is 3:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. So
Okay.
It's okay. Yeah, that's fine.
That's good.
Thank you so much. Like really, yeah, your hearts really came here as a very warm spark in the room. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone in the audience here?
Well, just a question. I don't need to.
No, it's just because they can't hear.
I don't know, it's just a point of invitation. Do you think it might be useful to say something about the flash cartels as well?
Yes, another for
Just to mention.
Go ahead, yeah, say something about it. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay. Well,
These are new forms of cartels that have risen in the last 4 or 5 years, I think.
yes,
Yes,
it's a development of the idea
yeah.
of cartels. They were originally called flash cartels, and they're a very useful device. So a flash cartel is a cartel that's set up usually for less than a year, something like 6 months, and it takes the theme of an upcoming conference. So for example, the next NLS conference, the theme and argument has been announced. So flash cartels are people who work in cartels on that theme. Now, it's an amazing difference to go to a conference, having been in a flash cartel, and spend 6 months working on the theme,
Point. Yes.
than just turning up there. So I just want to emphasize
It really
that
engages you with
it
the conference,
engages
yeah.
you with the conference. It's a different conference if you spend 6 months working on the theme. And I just wanted to highlight that is a development in the way cartels work. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alan. Any other comment? We're running over time a little bit. Linda?
No, I suppose just
Yeah.
to kind of carry on a little bit of what Alan is saying.
Great, yeah.
That there isn't any one way in which to create a cartel. And I think it's important to try to go against the notion that a cartel is either for 1 year or 2 years. It's not. Lacanian was never dogmatic in this regard. So there are many ways of forming cartels. Yes, with regard to the numbers, we're quite strict for the reasons that have been outlined already this morning. But you can set up a cartel for maybe, I know that Frank Rollier has spoken about this previously. Perhaps there's been a crisis in your community and a cartel can be set up to do that. There have been cartels that have been set up to do with the clinic, so clinical cartels. So it's not all about reading a seminar or reading a course. It can be about anything to do with your own desire and psychoanalysis. And that can be for a year, but it can be for less, as I was outlined. So just to put that out there.
Thank
and
you.
of course, there's been, since the pandemic, there's been a proliferation and an explosion in terms of online cartels also. And you know, that is something too that has yet to be read, I think, in this group. So maybe just to make those comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Is there any more question or remark? No, I just wanted to see that we haven't not seen any. Okay. Okay, so if there is no questions, we would like to thank all of you to have participated and have had the time for us to listen and to be with us. Thank you so much, and I hope this has sparked some desire in you. So feel free to contact us if you want to kind of know more about cartels.
Yeah.
Roz and I am the delegates here for ICLO-NLS, so please you can send us any email to ask. I mean, when I started, I didn't know at all how that worked, and so just there.
And perhaps we'll have the presentations at some.
Perhaps.
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 Sorry, I'm so late. Sorry, I'm so late. I'm calling in from Australia, but I just got the hour wrong. I think you start at 10 or at 11?
11 Irish times.
Irish time 11, yeah.
11 Irish time. Okay, I thought that was, could be 9 years. Anyway, so is there a continuation to this group or are you just a once-off?
Yes, we're ICLO, and this is the cartels of ICLO. So we're continuing to work.
You continue.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yes.
So when's your next meeting?
Well, that's
Be on our website.
yeah,
It will
that
be
would
announced on the
yeah.
website. Yeah. So
Yes.
you go on.
Website.
yeah,
Okay.
the ICLO website. Yeah,
And you the only cartel or there are other cartels?
Oh, those.
this is not a cartel. This is an intercartel meeting. So it's actually the
Cartel.
introduction to
Okay.
it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of more to kind of create, to kind of give you like a teaser, if you will.
Create yes.
Okay. Okay, all good.
Thank you
Oh,
so
good.
much for joining us.
I want to thank Eva and Ross for doing it in the bureau as well. And see you all. Thank you.